So everybody, please go back to your seats. We're going to start the next session. Yes, I'm sorry, it's me again. You already seen me. But I promise this is worth the while. I know I'm the last big item standing before you getting to the bar.
No, that's me. That's actually.
Yeah, well, I mean, talking about lengthy items, sorry. So it's consistent in the sense we're going to see a lot of very interesting projects, so please bear with me. Yeah, look at what happened in the session previously. We were talking about insurance and accounting, and then suddenly we were talking about changing the world. So who knows what's going to happen in this session. So I'm really glad to be here again. I'm really happy to see you here. I think it was quite hard to get seats to attend this event, as once the link was published, spaces run out quite quickly. Which is great, but also maybe unfortunate for those who were not able to get a space to this event. But I really think this translates the current perception around nature finance and natural capital in the sense that we all want this to happen. We want natural assets that really reflects the benefits they're providing to the stakeholders around, and we want projects to be able to come in and restore these assets and bring these benefits to people, businesses, and nature. So there might have been a bit of disappointment over the last year in terms of the pace and the scale that nature finance was delivering at this stage. But I think that's just the reality of what we're working with. This is a really novel space. We're building everything from scratch, so it's bound to take some time. And especially since we're really talking about changing mindsets about what nature provides and how we have to recognize that value. So if we want to build something more than a fade, we need to be taking the time to establish something more durable. But we're all sitting here today quite eager, and that really reinforces my perception that we all know that this is coming, it's bound to happen. So the way I see it, the next steps to making this happen is really to work on the two aspects, scale and demand. So both are linked, and we're also depending on external factors like policies, but if we keep pressuring in the right direction, we will get alignment sooner rather than later. So I really think that we're close to seeing a shift around demand and scale. On the demand side, we have had more and more roundtables and engagement with the private sector, with businesses, utility companies, and every time everyone comes with the same ask at the table, they want projects, they want opportunities to invest in, they want solutions. So that demand is growing. So it's more a question about how we effectively translate that demand into feasible outcomes at the project level, and also how we package it, because there is a need for common language. There is a need for coherence in terms of metrics, reporting framework. TNFD was an example there where we can try to seek alignment. Verification process, integrity, stacking, bundling, all these complex things, but speaking for us and Scottish government agencies, NGOs, everybody's working on their piece to try to make it work. So this is also coming to meet our needs. CSR, ESG have been one component of that demand. I think that going forward, as we talked about, the complementary aspect of it is going to be about climate change risk mitigation. And I think this is really going to be driving demand in the shorter term and reinforcing the different cases we've seen so far. So there is still work to be done at the business or industry level to really recognize the dependencies on the different natural assets and the ecosystem services. And maybe that's something we can try to work on with the different businesses and industries. But once we have that cleared out, I think it will be much better, easier to translate into actions on the ground. The other factor is, accounting. Yeah, we mentioned accounting. I think this is going to be also a strong enabler. The other factor I mentioned was scale. So we are not at the point where we can have multi-billion funds coming in and investing in our projects, unfortunately. But we've been injecting, as we've seen, millions into the development of the pipeline of projects. And I'm really glad to say that we are starting to see the results there. So amongst the projects here, we're going to have a few ones that are able to talk about positive agreements signed with the private sector, trading happening. So the Leven Lens is one example where they've not only are the second round of trading and which the amounts are increasing, but also they have got a model that has been replicated in other locations throughout Scotland. So we're having the beginning of what I hope to be a snowballing effect, where we'll be trying to duplicate the models, successful models in other places throughout Scotland. We talked about Smith getting over 10 million in commitment over 4 years. The Scottish Rivers Fund that's going to be doing the same, but for river catchment. So I think everybody is going to realize soon that we have more than what we think in terms of pipeline, or at least that was the perception over the last year. And hopefully the prospectus that we will be launching soon will be one way to really demonstrate that pipeline to everyone and make it in a way that makes sense for all the different users of the platform. But materializing that pipeline is going to be taking some time, at least to the scale we all want it to be. So that means we need to keep supporting through funding, expertise, community of practice, case studies, and so on. So I think that's something we still have to work on for the next years and going forward. Last point I'll mention is about risk mitigation. We talked about it already, but there is maybe a need to de-risk some of the projects or transaction just to make the first one happen, so we can have that snowball effect coming on, taking over at some point. We mentioned insurance. I think that's a great sign of saying the market is inching towards a bit more maturity. The fact that you have insurance company coming in and offering product to secure some of the transactions happening. But I still think that the main way forward is to support innovative projects and partners who were willing to take the risk and have been able to provide a product with sufficient value so that the private sector was eager to enter in an agreement or a partnership with the project. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to our cohort of projects, starting with you, William. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Hello. Again. In an effort to be polite, someone quite recently described my public speaking style as rambling. So the 90-second slot this morning wasn't really my bag. 10 minutes of me this time. So hopefully it's a little bit more coherent. So I can introduce myself too. So I'm William. I'm one half of Silvestris. And Silvestris are the natural capital consultants to the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest. And we're the natural capital consultants to the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest because about 3 years ago, I met Hannah and Julie Stoneman at a party where all good relationships start, and that was a rainforest party over at Ardtornish. And at the rainforest party, we talked into the night about the rainforest. Funny that. And we started talking about, Julie was saying to us, this is a major problem. We've got this huge funding gap. Is Julie still here? I'm just going to check I got the number right. 500 million. Inflation might have added a bit on. You get quite a lot of inflation at 500 million. And this is a problem. We were chatting and wine was flowing. It was a great night. And we'd cracked it. Natural capital could save the rainforest. We could do this. And then, of course, reality and a hangover kicked in the next day. And I wasn't quite so optimistic, but I thought, but there's got to be something in this. Because this is a real problem. We should be doing everything we possibly can to try and solve this problem. And by that time, we'd had a bit of experience with woodland carbon, selling a few of them to universities like Edinburgh. So we had we thought, there's something, this is real. It's not just something we all talk about at conferences. But there was a bit of a reality check quite quickly, which is that when you restore rainforest, I should just say rainforest is massively under threat. Our temperate rainforest, it's a globally rare habitat. We're very lucky to have it, but it is in trouble. I like Luke's audience participation earlier, so I'm going to do a bit, and you need to be brutally honest. Who's got rhododendron in their garden? Naughty. Because that is a big problem. Not just for rainforest, for lots of native woodland. So it's infested with invasive non-native plants, and it's really under a lot of grazing pressure, mostly from deer. So set the context. Those are the big problems for the rainforest. It's increasingly fragmented, it's receding, and it's not naturally regenerating as a result of those things. So you remove the rhododendron, or whatever it is, and you reduce the deer pressure, and it starts to recover. And biodiversity boosts. It's got a huge biodiversity value, these fragments of temperate rainforest. But there's not a market, really. There certainly wasn't any idea of a market then for biodiversity units in Scotland. We've heard today that demand is a big issue, which is another language for there's not really a market. So we had to think, well, what are we going to do then? What is there a market for? Could you call the peatland code and the units from that a market? Probably, but nothing to do with rainforest. Woodland carbon, we're back on. Maybe there's something in this. But of course, that only generates units when you create new woodland, not when you restore existing woodland. But it is fragmented, and most of the West Coast is still underwooded, even though it has lots of amazing woodland. So could we use the land that has potential for new woodland to connect the fragments of existing rainforest, being quite strategic with how we do it, very intentional with how we design it, generate carbon credits, which of course would have to be sold at a premium if you're then going to use that money then to reinvest in the restoration of existing rainforest, which would generate no revenue. We thought here we are now, we're going to look at this. We've got a bit of a concept. We'll apply to FIRNS, and we all apply to FIRNS. I know what you're thinking when you see that slide. It's like way too much text, so you guys enjoy reading that. I won't read it all out. We said it's got to be about woodland carbon because we've got to aim at something that we feel at the moment is scalable. And we need a governance structure. Lots of people have talked about governance, the management of the project, the delivery of the project, the reduction of risk as a result. And aggregation, because this is a multi-landholder project. ASR are a consortium of ENGOs, own some land, not loads. This has to work everywhere, where there's a range of landholder interest. And we piloted this on South Knapdale, led by ACT, Argyll Countryside Trust. Ross is here, their chairman today. It was quite a big project. Lots of people in this room involved in the project. It was a massive project, and it was really cool. And they were our, more jargon, local anchor institution. I think if we were all as good at selling carbon credits as we are at making up jargon, we'd have cracked it, I reckon. So the first thing, we're into FIRNS, got the grant, that's great. But we did have to take a step back because all of those ENGOs and other organisations connected to ASR can't go into an ecosystem service market, natural capital, private finance world lightly. It's fraught with risks, and you need to be able to have some guardrails, we felt, before we do. Luke, I've got a bit of a bone to pick, with you again, because you don't like integrity. And I understand I'm not saying you don't like integrity. That's not what came across in your presentation. But for us, it has a different role, because actually it did used to get up my nose a lot when I used to see a lot of stuff coming out of project developers, ENGOs. So this is our integrity standards for our project. I think we know that. You guys are amazing at that. Actually, for us, the integrity has to be on the other side. So are we going to partner with value-aligned buyers of ecosystem services and financial investors? Beyond SBTI, because SBTI is a great set of standards when it comes to emissions reductions and offsetting, but what about other things? What about their other activities? Are they invested in, for example, tobaccos, arms, are there human rights issues? Are they complying with fair work? All of these things are in there. It's in the public domain. It's a cool document. So to partner with ASR, you need to meet that integrity charter. And I think it sets a suitable bar. It's not so high that we're not in the market. We're working with partners now, and they're past that, so it's really good. And the project standards, designing new woodland, which has rainforest characteristics, that's very different to being old-growth rainforest, is very difficult. So we have these project standards that tell you how to do that, because ASR don't have to do every project. Landowners can do it themselves. how to work with the community and ground the community in the decisions you make around land, and the restoration of the rainforest as well, because they're quite complex interventions. I'll skip on now, because I'm conscious probably already halfway through in time, but not on slides. That's South Knapdale. It's a really cool place. If you haven't been, go. By chance, it has pretty much an equal amount of rainforest in need of restoration and potential for new native woodland, 2,700, 2,800 hectares of each. Big area, lot to go at, great scale, huge impact. Removing rhododendron from that much woodland and managing deer over that whole landscape is a massive, massive undertaking. I've stolen my own thunder. It's really expensive. There's a cost side coming up. £52 million we worked out that doing all of this work over 40, 50 years would take. Creating new woodland, restoring existing rainforest, delivering community benefit. And actually, Marion's blowing me out the water a bit too, because I often say it, everyone goes, oh, whoa, so expensive. But did you say 100 million, Marion, for your... There you go. Well, we're pocket money then, in that case. And that new woodland would deliver a lot of carbon. Banged it all into the Woodland Carbon Code. We didn't survey every single potential land holding on Knapdale. We had to draw some pretty wide assumptions. But over 40 years, between a mixture of natural regeneration, but mostly new planting, if we created that new woodland, we'd generate 560-odd thousand carbon credits. So we would sell those, generate revenue, reinvest it back into rainforest restoration. And this is how we got to the cost. Rhododendron removal, people are often surprised by it, would cost 14 million of that to do. So when you get home and you look in your garden, if it's still light, and you see the rhododendron out there, which is probably really beautiful and taking up some space that you don't want to have to do something else with, very expensive to remove from rainforest. So is deer management. So are landowner payments. I think that's just, as a near 20-year now landowner's agent, now in camouflage, in nature restoration and natural capital, this has been a theme of today. Landowners need to be paid to host this woodland. Where they own ancient rainforest, very happy to have it restored. If that costs nothing, brilliant, through the project, and don't necessarily need a payment for that. But the land that would be hosting new woodland is in agricultural production at the moment, and so there's an opportunity cost to that. We agreed, and it was relatively well received with the landowners of the peninsula, that if we could pay them per hectare, turned out to be 70, 80 pounds per year, index linked, which is broadly business as usual for them. It's a combination of the different subsidies they get for that type of land. That was going to be attractive. And that was going to be attractive because it was 40 years index linked, rather than an uncertain outlook for agricultural subsidy and volatile commodity markets. And a lot of them, with that uncertainty and volatility, are looking at restructuring. Can they diversify their income? This would be a diversified fixed income away from agriculture. So when they're coming to think about the future of their farm businesses, maybe having native woodland that actually generates an income would work. But it's a big, big cost. You could get about 10 million quid, 11 million quid in forestry grant scheme payments. So new payment for creating the new woodland, which all landowners and land managers can get if you create a new woodland. Which is helpful, not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but helpful, reducing the net cost to 42 million, which meant if we sold all of those carbon credits, we would cover all of those costs over all of this time. We'd have to sell a carbon credit, a PIU, up front, that's tricky, for 74 quid, which is a lot more than people buy them for at the moment, despite the range of co-benefits this would be delivering and we would be measuring. That's quite a hard sell. We had to think about how we were going to finance this. So that's one option in the middle. Buy a model, it's called, which means that you sell those PIUs, you sell them up front, you sell them 74 quid, you put the money in the bank, and we'll come on to the governance, but you hold that money, the vehicle that's managing this project, and you pay it out and you do everything that you have to do over time. But you've got to sell 560-odd thousand carbon credits, which is not likely, it's putting it lightly, I think, at 74 quid. So huge demand, which there isn't, big price, which there isn't much of an appetite for. So probably not, I'm not saying no to that, but probably, like never, but probably not going to work right now. Investor model, There are two ways, so a lot of you guys will know this, but there are two types of investor we would think about and talk about. An equity investor, put the money in, own a share in the project, realize the return when you start to sell the credits later, or maybe sell their share when it's worth more later down the line when the risk is reduced and there are assets by way of carbon credits in the project. Great, because actually the alternative is debt, a loan. They lend us the money and we start paying interest on it, maybe capital back, but impossible for this project because it doesn't generate any revenue for quite a long time. So it hasn't got the cash flow to service that debt. So not going to work. So equity investor, most likely, assuming that there isn't that massive PRU demand. And last one on the end, philanthropy model, which in our project we were looking at this because at the time, and I think still true today, philanthropy wasn't delivering the scale that we needed, that 500 million, it wasn't filling that gap. So a lot of good work is going on in ASR at the moment still on philanthropy, and they're experts at it, but it will be blended. We needed to look at this because it's just not, we've got to get all of this done. I put this slide in every time and then think, why did I put that slide in? So I'll try and explain it now, which I can't. We found that the best, so we talked about governance. I talked about governance. So have you been able to hear me this whole time? I just feel I've not listened. Have you? Great. The governance model involves ACT, the local anchor institution, and that's really important because they know the community. They have networks in the community. They are the community. They've also got a track record in nature restoration. They've done a lot of rhododendron removal, peatland restoration, new woodland creation. So that was when we were speaking and are speaking to prospective buyers, investors. We found that's really important. So that's a key takeaway for me, I think. Even though this wasn't as a landowner, having the community grounded and rooted organisation at the centre of this is really important and gives us a chance, I think, where others have a lower chance. So they would sit in the middle with this thing called a limited liability partnership, and that was the chosen type of entity over limited companies and CICs and this sort of thing, in simple terms for two reasons. Pretty flexible, simple for tax. So you go straight through to the member, whatever the members are, and taxes at their rate. They would have agreements with investors, partnership agreements with estate owners who'd put their land into the partnership. We have a project developer, whatever that is, Forest Carbon, Palladium, these guys, with ACT, who know the ground, the design, how you deliver it. They deliver it. You work with contractors. You sell I'm telling you stuff you know. You sell the wood and carbon credits, you generate the revenue, and you pay back the investor. That's that horrible schematic. But that was the idea that we came up with. Not new, but we just needed to know that's how we would do it in Argyll. This is the cash flow. So you know that this is real now because you see this and people think that charts are really real. So we did actually crunch all of the numbers. And, it's confusing. And if you know what you're looking at here, it's tricky. It's lumpy. There's not very much more upward than downward, which is why the return is relatively low. So, and you spoke earlier, and I turned white a bit when you said, our guys are going to need, it's 20 or so years maximum, low double figures. I think not unreasonable, but problem for us because we've got this two types of investors over 40 years. The first one that would come in, willing to take a slightly higher risk to get 7 or 8%. And that's because this is an expensive project. If you weren't doing the restoration bit of the rainforest, it might be 10 or 11. So that was a hammer blow, Ian, for us really to hear you say that. We'll chat later. And then you go into the second phase where you're starting to get verified units, which means the trees are starting to grow. It's working, the risk is reducing, you've got assets, but the return is therefore lower because we assume this first higher risk investor sells on their interest to someone who's willing to have a lower risk, lower return. And you're then in you're in 5% IRR net return then. It's not very much, but it's all there. And the investors we did speak to said, this isn't terminal for us. What is terminal, and we've heard this from Fraser and others, is that we just can't see that there's a huge amount of demand right now. We haven't got market signals to give us the confidence that we can invest in this project, because what do you guys call it in bottomless pit? or bottomless loss or something. If no one wants to buy these carbon credits, you haven't got anything. If you buy land, you get out by selling the land and hopefully sell it for about the same amount. But if you invest this 40 million and the carbon credit market doesn't work or whatever, then I can see from an investor's perspective that's pretty risky. So we finished with a few recommendations, and they were things like, and we've heard some of them today, maybe the government could intervene in a different way with the way it deploys public funding to underwrite the cost, like contracts for difference, where you have strike prices and then an investor knows that if the market drops, they're going to get a minimum price, which gives them a minimum return or covers that worst case loss scenario. Maybe the government could increase the demand by saying, well, if you procure goods and services from us, because we're a pretty big buyer of stuff, you have to be net zero, and that means you have to be buying some carbon credits and probably from nature. It might drive some demand too. Wouldn't completely whole scale change the game, I don't think, but it might be an intervention that ScotGov could make. So we're out there now. We're talking to prospective buyers of these carbon credits, and they haven't run away when we said they're 70 odd quid. They won't want to buy 500,000, but they might buy some. We think a minimum viable product is to start with 1,000 hectares of new woodland creation, which would allow us to fund 1,000 hectares of rainforest restoration. And you guys that do the investor stuff in the room, if you are convinced by this and you think, actually, maybe I could take 7 or 8% because this is such a great project, then give me a shout.
Thank you, William. It's been really instructive, very detailed presentation on the project. That's really great. And I know there is something to be done around the demand and how we materialize that demand, because I assure you there is demand. It's just about how we translate it into the projects and how the projects give it back to the investors. And there are different kinds of investors or buyers. So we'll try to find a solution, but thank you. We don't have time for questions, unfortunately, so I'll just pass it on to Graham, and we'll come back to questions at the end if we have some more time. So Graham, welcome on the stage.
Good afternoon. My name is Graham Neville. I'm Head of Operations for the North of Scotland for NatureScot, and I'm also the Chairman and the Director of Flow Country Partnership. Are in my spare? No. So we've all been in this lovely room talking about all the ins and outs in finance. I'm not going to have anything like the schematics that William's just shared. But come with me on a journey, though. Let's go and put our wellies on to a landscape of vast peatlands, rolling topography in every direction, myriad pools reflecting the sky, and around the calls of curlews and lapwing, and beneath our feet, the rich greens, browns, and reds of carpets of sphagnum mosses that have been growing for 9,000 years. A landscape that quietly stores more carbon than the tree carbon stored in all the forests in the United Kingdom combined. This is the flow country in the north of Scotland, and I need that. At first glance, this landscape looks empty. A remote sweep of land shaped by wind, water, and time. But in reality, it's one of the most extraordinary ecosystems on Earth. It covers about 400,000 hectares, a mosaic of mosses, pools, birds, and open skies, and it's the largest actively accumulating blanket bog in the world. Layer upon layer of peat has been slowly building here for millennia, storing carbon drawn from the atmosphere long before the industrial age began. And in fact, the flow country stores 400 million tonnes of carbon. And in 2024, it was recognised globally when it became the first peatland UNESCO World Heritage Site on Earth. So it's not just simply a beautiful landscape, it's one of the planet's most important natural climate assets. But there is a problem. By no surprise to anyone in this room that it's a severely damaged ecosystem where over the last century it's been drained and altered through the forestry and other inappropriate land management. And today about 180,000 hectares of it are in some way degraded. Instead of storing carbon, these areas are releasing it. Every year they emit roughly 1.4 million tonnes of carbon dioxide, contributing significantly to Scotland's emissions. And in 2019, when fire ripped across this landscape, for the days it burned nearly over 6,000 hectares, Scotland's emissions doubled. So a landscape that should be helping to stabilise the climate is, in fact, doing the opposite. Keeping this wetland wet, therefore, is of the utmost importance. The good news is that it can be reversed. By restoring natural water levels, by blocking drains, by re-wetting the peat, we can allow the ecosystem to recover. And the sphagnum moss returns and peat begins to accumulate again. Bird life increases. Water quality improves. And importantly, that switch from carbon source to carbon sink. And this is where the Flow Country Partnership comes in. The Flow Country Partnership is a community-led charitable organisation working with landowners, farmers and crofters across Caithness and Sutherland. Our goal is simple: to restore the Flow Country's peatlands at landscape scale, using that World Heritage inscription as a catalyst to scale up and move faster. We work with the land managers to design restoration projects, secure the funding, and deliver the work on the ground. We arrange the validation, the monitoring, the maintenance, and the verification. And the climate benefits are then certified through the Peatland Code. This generates the carbon units which can be purchased. Oh, okay. And there is something unusual about our model, because unlike many restoration developers, the Flow Country Partnership operates a not-for-profit charity, which means that the revenue generated from carbon credits is not extracted. And in future, the biodiversity credits and the direct restoration benefits are part of that picture. Instead, the profits from the Flow Country Partnership are reinvested back into the landscape, into further restoration, into local communities, and into jobs and skills in one of the most remote parts of the UK. In fact, it's a lovely story that one of the crofters who's involved in one of our projects also is a digger driver. And what he's discovered is that the peatland restoration goes with the cycle of crofting beautifully. And over the winter, he's been working with us as a new entrant into peatland restoration with his digger. I've never outgrown that digger phase, by the way. Love them. With that digger, doing the restoration as a new part of an economic activity. So it is an important economic activity in a fragile area. So we are, as was picked up earlier, we are trying to build that circular restoration economy in Caithness and Sutherland. And we are trying to get that restorative, non-extractive picture built. So the opportunity here is enormous. Across the Flow Country, as I said, we estimate around 180,000 hectares are in some way degraded and will benefit from restoration. So this represents one of the largest nature restoration opportunities in Europe. The potential carbon value alone has been estimated at around 1.4 and 4.2 billion over the lifetime of projects. Obviously, hugely perfect world figures there. But it's not just about the carbon. It's about the biodiversity recovery, the improved water quality, the flood mitigation and slowing river flashiness, dealing with water scarcity, water cooling, and landscapes that are more resilient to wildfire and climate change. So the return on investment is the pillars of environmental, social, and economic. We know that there's growing scrutiny of the carbon markets, and we've already touched on the 2023 expose. People do want to know if the carbon is real, if the science is real, if the benefits are real, if it's greenwashing, if it's damaging to local communities. And I think that's where the Flow Country Partnership model does provide a powerful answer to these questions. Because here we have a globally important ecosystem with international recognition through UNESCO World Heritage status, and science-based carbon certification, and our partners through the Environment Research Institute at the University of Highlands and Islands, some of the leading peatland scientists in the world, part of our project. And a community-led delivery model with strong, mature governance and ethical frameworks. Few natural capital projects combine all of these elements. We have already begun, I did warn you about the diggers. Over the last 2 years, we've delivered pilot restoration projects with local landowners, restoring over 1,000 hectares of peatland. and those projects are now progressing through to peatland code validation. The units are almost ready for sale, as I mentioned, and we do stand ready for investment and purchase. Carbon income investment will help us to build that growing pipeline of projects. So we're looking for that investment around helping us to scale up, helping us to build that pipeline over the next period of time. Our ambition to scale restoration from 2 to 3 projects a year and expanding steadily is over the coming decade. But perhaps the most important thing about the flow country is this. The landscape has been shaped by people for generations. Farmers, crofters, estate workers, local communities, the majority of the peatland remains in good condition, World Heritage Status condition, thanks to the stewardship of generations of crofters. And its future depends on them too. Restoration, as we've touched on, it cannot happen to communities. It has to happen with and through and of them. And this is why the Flow Country Partnership exists, to bring together the science, land management, the finance and the community knowledge, and to restore this globally important ecosystem. So the Flow Country shows us, I think, something important. Climate solutions don't always have to require new technology. They're not always far from home for those of us in the north. But it's about maintaining and restoring landscapes that have quietly regulated our climate for thousands of years and must continue to do so for thousands more. And if we do succeed, the Flow Country will not just be the world's greatest blanket bog. It's a model, a global model for circular nature restoration, climate action, and community benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. I think it was really inspiring to hear about what you've done around the Flow Country and the World Heritage, UNESCO World Heritage Site. And notwithstanding what we've been talking about with SBTI, I think there is something about the peatland credits that anybody can see in terms of benefits and the value that it holds. So hopefully we'll hear some good news in the coming month about some kind of deal you would be succeeding. And if anyone in the room is eager to talk to Graham, please be my guest. Next we have Douglas, who will come and talk about the five coast and countryside trusts and your experience and why you've been interested in taking part of the adventure.
Thank you. I'm a farmer in Fife. I farm about 1,200 acres just outside Leven, between Leven and Kenaway, behind Diageo bottling warehouses and the distillery there. It's a traditional mixed farm, and since 1999, I went sort of slightly on the dark side. What is probably not called witchcraft anymore, but it was for a time, is regenerative farming. And I've changed my whole, the farm has changed quite a bit since then. So I'm pretty much carbon neutral. And 3 or 4 years ago, I thought, well, additionality, what the hell do I do? But I realized that there was things I still can do on the farm, whether it do wide hedges or a bit of rewilding on parts of the farm, or river restoration, or cleaner water on the burns that run through the farm. And I looked at a lot of organizations to see how I could fund that, because it wouldn't do anything for my bottom line. It wouldn't do anything for my agricultural profit. It's purely nature-driven stuff. And I spoke to a lot of organizations. How can I get funding for this? And so it's a bit piecemeal. But then I met Heather Hayes, who should have been speaking here today, from the Fife Coast and Countryside Trust. And they've been working over the last 2 to 3 years in trying to build a model by which they can get landowners to collaborate and do things more on a landscape scale, or a river catchment scale. And that really caught my attention quite a lot, because it helps. it ticks all the boxes. As they were looking at a cooperative type vehicle by which to do it. It's still in its infancy. We've got a lot of projects ready to go, very much helped by FIRNS funding on the baselining, on the drill burn, as Douglas Bowden-Smith was saying earlier on. And hopefully it will take off. We've got projects ready to go. Farmers have been very reticent on the whole in joining in, and they're wanting to wait to see how it happens. But what comes first, the chicken or the egg? So we've got to do something at some stage. But I'm very naive. I don't know much about, this conference has been way above my head today because basically I'm a farmer, and my skill set is in farming, not in nature. Now, I'm not an ecologist, although I've had quite a lot of help with ecologists on the farm in the past, advised me what way to go. I can see it happening slowly in the area. River Leven, between Leven and Methil there. What amazing amount of work that's been done on the river there. I used to go down there, and the bottom of it was just a mass of supermarket trolleys on the bottom of the river, sticking up at low tide. And they've really cleaned it up, taken the weirs out and so on. But I'm digressing there. What else do I say? So basically, it's a landscape. Five Coastal Countryside Trust, leading a coalition of partners, including not-for-profit organizations, community, public bodies, and private business, to see how the region can lead in the financial innovation for land, water, and nature. I'm picking up from earlier on, Ian, about the 10% return on capital. I'm wondering what I'm doing being a farmer, to be honest. The cattle invested, I'm getting maybe, if I'm lucky, a 2.5% on my capital invested in the farm, the value of the land, 2.5% return. I should sell the farm and put it into Rebalance Earth, maybe. But there's more to that than being a farmer. I'm very wildlife focused and soils focused on the farm to try to tick the elusive box of making a profit and helping nature recovery and climate change, ticking all the boxes at the same time, which is quite a tall order for a farmer. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Douglas, and thank you for stepping in instead of Ed, who, could not come last minute. So next we will hear about, Scotland, the big picture, SSENT transmission with Lisa. Up.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and well done, everyone, for surviving to this point in the day. It's been quite the mental workout, hasn't it? And I think it's proof of what you can achieve on a diet of coleslaw and cake. It's working for me anyway. So, thank you very much. We're nearly there, and as a special reward, we have a presentation with almost no words in it, which I think you'll probably find quite baffling when you get the slides after the event and look back and go, what am I supposed to do with this exactly? But what do you reckon we've got, Emily? 100 words between our slides? Something like that. Yeah. So, a bit of a treat in terms of pictures rather than words anyway. So I'm Lisa Chilton. I'm Chief Exec of Scotland, the Big Picture, and my co-conspirator is Emily Johns from SSEN Transmission. And I'm going to walk you through our journey of accelerating smaller scale rewilding through nature finance, and then Emily is going to give her reflections on that. So this is me and Emily, both movers and shakers in our own way, but very different fields, really. Scotland, the Big Picture is a small rewilding charity, 24 staff, turnover of about £1 million, and then Emily is in, SSEN, totally different world. And yet we've managed to find a path through. We've overcome the language barriers of our respective fields, and it's a partnership that's really working. So that's what we're going to be telling you about today. First of all, though, I thought it'd be useful for you to have a little bit of background to Scotland the Big Picture, what we do, and how this partnership came about, because we're working with a pre-existing network of landowners and introducing them to the world of nature finance. So, Scotland Big Picture, rewilding charity, and quite unusual in that it was set up by a group of nature photographers and filmmakers. So that storytelling, visual storytelling piece has always been a really important part of what we have done, and it still remains at the heart of things, and we'll come back to that later. So our vision is a vast network of rewilded land and water across Scotland where wildlife flourishes and people thrive. Is that right? I've been in post 10 months, I should know that off by heart by now. But the people thrives bit is particularly important because rewilding is sometimes perceived as being exclusive of people, and that's definitely not how we want it done. So one of our main strands of work is driving support for rewilding. And we do that in a number of ways, through our films, and hopefully you've seen some of these. We produce feature-length films as well as lots and lots of shorter ones. Through our rewilding training and immersive rewilding experiences. These are just a few of the courses that we have coming up, in case there's anything there that piques your interest. We have everything from one-day courses to 5-day residentials in the Cairngorms. We also have a biennial conference, and this is conference year. So 19th of September in Perth, come along to the rewilding event for Scotland. We normally have 500 or 600 people there and a fantastic lineup of speakers. This year, for the first time, you can actually get to play with clay in the lunch break as well. So what's not to love about that? So that communication storytelling piece is really important. But the second strand of our work is committing more land and water to rewilding. And unlike many other environmental NGOs, we have gone down the route of not buying land. Now, never say never, but to date, as a small organisation, we have always considered that we can have much, much greater impact by working with landholders, the experts in their land, and we can bring our skills and knowledge to bear and have much greater impact that way rather than taking on land ourselves. And our flagship project working with landowners is the Northwoods Rewilding Network, which came about at our 2019 conference when we were approached by a couple of farmers who said, yep, you've got us, we want to do it. What do we do now? And so on the back of that, we've really built an advisory and support service for landowners. And what started with those first 2 sites has now grown to, I think we're now at 103 sites, the length and breadth of Scotland, covering a total of 37,000 acres. And the role of our role within that partnership is essentially helping overcome barriers that are preventing the landholders from rewilding. And those first 2 farmers, their concerns were firstly, how do we make it pay? Particularly if we stand to lose some of our agricultural subsidy by changing the land use. Secondly, we don't have the ecological expertise. Can you help us? And thirdly, what are our neighbouring farmers going to think? And how much stick are we going to get from them if we start doing things differently? And so those are the kind of barriers that we help them address. So we help them access funding. That could just be signposting funding opportunities. In some cases, it's actually helping them write the bids. NRF is a popular one, needless to say. And in other cases where they don't have the confidence or skills, then we will actually lead the project. We'll be the applicant. We'll put the bid in and then manage the project with them. So finance is one part of it. Another is training, and you'll have seen the training programs that we run. There are discounted or free places for our land partners. And then we also, I think this is really important, we tell their stories. Because 103 sites is fantastic and it's still growing, but it's still just 103 sites. And the real power in that is telling their stories and normalising what we're doing and making it acceptable and desirable to other landowners. So we build up confidence, we help them with their kind of influencing skills, their conflict navigation skills, and all that kind of thing as well. Now, all the sites, as you see from the slide, are roughly between 50 acres and 1,000 acres. So they're small to medium sized. And that's not an accident. It's very much by design, because we were wanting to democratize rewilding and take it away from being the preserve of, billionaire landowners. And so we're trying to demonstrate that rewilding can work at all scales, but of course it needs to work financially at all scales as well as ecologically. So the network is free to join. When they join, we'll visit the landowner and we'll agree a 5-year programme of work with them. And there are a few red lines to this. So it is rewilding. Some of it feels more like kind of like down the nature-friendly farming end of the spectrum rather than the sort of hardcore rewilding, but it is all on that spectrum. But the red lines are no muir burn, no predator control, no game bird release, no intensive sheep ranching, and no pesticides. But beyond that, anything goes in terms of nature restoration approaches. These are the 9 principles that underpin the network, and 7 of them are ecological, things you'd expect, more water, more woodland, but the 8th and 9th are arguably the most important. So there's one about communities, and I think in the context of land reform, which has come up quite a few times today, that's incredibly important that the landowners are engaging with communities, and not just engaging, that they are developing community-led approaches wherever feasible. And also that it's financially viable. So we also are very much supporting the development of rewilding and nature-based businesses within the network. And I should have said that we also make small grants ourselves, as well as helping the landowners secure other grants. So this is our dashboard, which we publish every year after a survey of the landowners. And you can just see some of the metrics. If you can read those, they're quite small. I lied perhaps a bit. I've forgotten this slide when I was talking about 100 words. There's a few more there. But there's been £400 million of spending in local economies as a result of the rewilding initiatives. There are more than 100 full-time equivalent jobs as a result of the rewilding within the network. And, 35 beavers released and X amount, 350,000 trees planted, all that kind of thing. But does it actually work? We recently partnered with Liverpool John Moores University to do some paired analysis of rewilded sites within the network and non-rewilded sites that were equivalent ecologically in other ways. And you can see for yourself some of the incredible uplifts that there have been in biodiversity. Now, our focus is on natural processes, reinstating natural processes, but you can read into the biodiversity uplifts as a proxy that your natural processes are working more effectively than they were before. So partnering with SSEN then, perhaps not natural partners, certainly might not have felt like that a few years ago, and there are some members in the network who are really quite against it and who will give us a bit of an ear bashing whenever we raise it. But there are also some who have been really keen to explore this further. And I think the partnership has worked really well. So these are the steps of the process that we go through. We talk to partners, we identify potential sites that might be of interest to Emily and her team. We pitch them. They then decide yes, no, maybe. At that point, there's a full ecological survey done. All being well, go to land management plan and heads of terms. We've got 16, I think, of our partner sites in the pipeline at the moment. None have yet made it to fully signed. Oh, but they're so close. Yeah, we're so nearly there. And, that'll be something well worth celebrating when we get to that stage. So, some reflections. See what I did there? From me, it's been really positive for us. It's our first foray into nature finance and bringing non-philanthropic income and non-grant-based income into our world of rewilding. And I hope it's not the last thing we do. It needs to be. We need that funding to accelerate what we're doing. We know where we are in terms of the environmental crisis. And I think, rewilding, or whatever you want to call it, and some of our partners don't call it that, it has to happen at scale and much faster than it is currently. So for us, it's a really positive thing. We've learned a huge amount from working with Emily and her colleagues, and we're looking forward to a bright future with it. Now, I'm going to hand over to Emily. Depending on how we're doing for time, and I have no idea, we might have time for a short film at the end as a sort of extra reward for you, but let's see how we go. Patrick can keep us in line.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Yeah, so my job is to give you the corporate and the buyer perspective, which I think is often missing in things like this. So I guess the first thing to talk about is like what is in it for us. And I've wanted to pick out 3 kind of key points to keep the word short. First one, our entire strategy for delivering nature restoration is to work with experts. We're an infrastructure company. Like, we are not the ecological experts. We've got ecologists in-house, we have got natural capital experts, but we're not the people who know what needs to happen on the ground. That's the likes of Lisa and Scotland, the big picture. The second point is that of these 103 landowners and swiftly growing, most of them are people that we could like never dream to meet. How would we, this big infrastructure organisation, come across someone who's got, I don't know, 18 hectares somewhere in, let's be honest, the arse end of nowhere? Like, how would we come across them? So this matchmaking exercise has been absolutely invaluable to us. The third one is scalability. There's so much momentum behind the Northwoods network now that it is growing and growing and growing. And the more we can prove as a business that we can partner with these sorts of landowners and landholders, the more that natural growth that happens with Scotland, the big picture itself, means that we can grow the pipeline that we need. Lots of you will be aware of how much is happening in the grid upgrades in Scotland, and especially in the north of Scotland, where we're based. We've got to figure out how to spend £100 million on nature restoration in the next 5 years. That's no mean feat. Anyone that's been on the kind of funding side of the NRF knows how difficult that £65 million has been to figure out. We've got to figure it out in a way that has never been done before. No one really knows how this works. BNG is this brand new emerging market. We're kind of competing with carbon markets, so it's all totally new. Which kind of brings me on to what actually made this work. First one is flexibility. Scotland, the big picture, have had to work within our mad procurement models. We're a regulated business. It is complicated. There's the corporate angle, then you've got Ofgem that regulate us. We're semi-public, semi-private. It's really confusing, and there's plenty of people in the room that we've tried to talk to and we are actively talking to about funding. Thank you all for bearing with us, those of you, because it is complicated. And one of the reasons that this is working so well with Scotland, the big picture, is flexibility on both sides. Kathleen, I don't know where you are at the back, when Kathleen and I sat down 2 years ago now to figure out how this could work, what we've got today is probably not that much like what we imagined it would be, but it's working, and we've changed and adapted over the last 2 years to make it into something that does work for both of us. The second one is a bit of willingness to take risk. This is risky. I came into the organisation and said, I've seen this really cool film about salmon and trees and rivers, and I think we should probably work with that charity. And the company was a bit like, I'm not convinced. I don't think that's our job. So I had to go back and convince people to take a risk on it. Kathleen had to go back to Scotland with a picture and say, hey, there's this massive infrastructure company and they seem to want to give us some money and work with us. How does this work? And so willingness to take risk on both sides has been really important. And the last one, I kind of want to bring back to like the word rewilding. The point for me at which I sat down and went, right, we have to work with Scotland Big Picture was at the conference 2 years ago, and Peter Cairn stood on stage and basically said, right, rewilding is a word that is the elephant in the room. I'm going to define what it means for the rest of the day, and that's what we all agree on. And at that point, I was like, right, okay, they get what is going on here. They get the controversy that might happen if we partner with a rewilding network. They understand that we need to be clear and communicate transparently, and it's been like that the whole way through. So anyone that's on the corporate side in here, they're a great group of people to work with, highly recommend them. And anyone that's kind of on the side trying to come to the likes of us for funding, go and speak to Kathleen and Lisa. Like, we'll all be honest about reflections from what we've learned there. I think that's everything that I wanted to say. So, Patrick, back to you.
So there is the film if we have time.
I have no idea. How long is the film?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, I think that works. I see a lot of tired eyes, so maybe we'll skip the questions and look at the
I don't know. I don't want to forfeit everyone's questions. But...
No, but I think we'll still have time at the end.
Okay. We get through it. Hopefully the sound is on. There we go. This was produced to celebrate the 100th partner coming aboard.
Well, thank you, Sally, for this very inspiring video, and thank you, Emily, for coming as well to talk about this beautiful partnership. So next, we'll let Tom come in and talk about Lens.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tom. I'm the Programme Manager for Lens in Scotland. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of what Lens is, kind of how it works, and some of the benefits we're trying to deliver to farmers, funders, and landscapes in Scotland. So I think other talks have done a good job of setting the scene here. But in terms of what some of the problems are that we're trying to solve, obviously climate impacts in Scotland are worsening. We had our driest spring in 60 years and hottest summer on record, with obviously obvious effects on kind of variable yields, crops struggling to hit specifications, etc. And this is also having an impact on businesses that rely on the landscape. So here are 3 Lens funders. I'll just zoom in on Diageo for their relevance to Scotland. But that water scarcity this summer, whisky distilleries have had to halt production due to abstraction restrictions and obvious impacts on kind of cereal supply chains there. And that's against a backdrop of kind of net zero targets, TCFD reporting, increased scrutiny on sustainability credentials. So the question that we're trying to answer is how to build resilience in the face of these risks, and also how to meet these environmental goals. And, you know, build resilience both at a business level, but also farm level and landscape level. And so regenerative agriculture, obviously a key solution to this. The evidence base is building that in the face of these climate events over the long term, regenerative farms are showing better productivity, better profitability, and importantly, equivalent yields. Obviously, underneath that profitability column, there's also lower input costs, which, given the last few weeks of geopolitics, is also a very important factor to consider when we're thinking about farm resilience. However, as we've identified today, there are lots of barriers to farms adopting regenerative practices. So at Lens, we're basically trying to overcome the economic barriers through funding, but also some of these operational and social barriers. So we're trying to provide training, farm-level data, and community of practice around new techniques, all in an effort to overcome the kind of lack of transition finance that exists both in Europe and Scotland, all over the globe. And if we're going to address this gap, we're sitting at 5% of what we need to adapt to climate change, then collaboration is going to be key. We need to get every business that relies on the landscape or gets an ecosystem service out of the landscape to chip in and recognise that value. And that's where we come in. So we facilitate organisations coming together to co-fund regenerative agriculture and nature-based solutions and drive that landscape resilience. So it's a proven model. We've delivered around 50,000 tonnes of emissions reductions and removals since 2021, around 26 million in funding to farmers, and we've got around 350 farms. Important to say, 2 conversations that we've been having all afternoon, but we look beyond just carbon. So I'll come on to it in a bit, but you can see kind of significant reductions in synthetic inputs on Lens farms and increases in biodiversity. I think one really interesting and cool thing about the model is although we are across kind of the whole of Western Europe, we make sure every Lens is place-based. So including myself, there's a number of staff in Scotland, but we also work with local rivers trusts in Scotland to make sure we're addressing local environmental needs, making the most of the networks that already exist. And we've been quite successful at bringing together disparate interests. So we work with utility companies, big food and drink companies, local government, quite a broad coalition, really. So Lens in Scotland, you can see the organisations that are involved on the screen. This year, 2025, was our first year actually getting money to farmers in the Leven. And that was, the funders were Perth and Kinross Council, Diageo and SSENT, funding stuff on farm. And we worked with the Forth Rivers Trust, so they did a lot of the kind of supply-side engagement. They hold the relationships with landowners. They helped us to design the measures and target where they were implemented to make sure we were addressing issues in Loch Leven, for example, phosphate eutrophication. This all has been made possible really by FIRNS. They've been a really key partner throughout. So NatureScot and the Scottish Government have, that's what's enabled this to happen. And I'll go through the rest of the organisations on this screen later, but in 2026, a couple of weeks ago, we opened in the Tweed. So we're getting money to farmers in the Tweed this year, and we've also got the project in the Leven. Next year, hopefully Speyside with Spey Catchment Initiative, and one place that's missing from here, which hopefully looks like it might happen next year, is the South Esk. And all of these projects, we're kind of working with the Rivers Trusts in the regions. In terms of the Leven, what it looked like this year, we had 10 farms involved, 600 hectares of measures, and around 110,000. So that's around £200 per hectare to farmers for 11 different practices. So a lot of soil health and ground cover practices. So that's minimum tillage, cover cropping, green manures, etc. And then around 20% to biodiversity. So hedgerow creation, tree planting, that sort of thing. In terms of where next year looks like we're going in the Leven, we're kind of seeing some good momentum. We hope to increase measure area by about 50%, and we've got funding confirmed for quadrupling funding from last year. So I think to Patrick's point around, we're getting to the point where people are kind of putting their hands in their pockets and people are investing in these programs. And we hope to recruit around 15 more farms. The Tweed this year, we've been working with the Tweed Forum, really amazing organisation, and we'll get the Tweed lens set up this year. It will look quite similar to the Leven lens this year. You can see kind of the figures on the screen there. And in terms of the features of the model that have underpinned some of this investment, I think a key one really is reliable data. And you can see to the point around stacking those interests, we do look at, climate's obviously a big one, carbon's a big one, but we also report, every lens funder receives one of these reports, water, biodiversity, soil health, and interestingly, farmer well-being now. So we're trying to see if we can track return on investment for these practices and show how these farms fare better in the face of climate events. We're aligned with all kind of key standards you'd expect, so greenhouse gas protocol and science-based targets. And I think it's important to say we're not selling credits, so this is within supply chain mitigation. This is, farms within Diageo's supply chain reducing fertilizer inputs, which then reduces their scope 3. No organisation is going to be able to meet their science-based target through credits. And, these metrics are also, you can feed them into your TNFD, TCFD, that sort of thing. Underpinning all that then is primary data. So every hectare on every lens farm is visited by AgriCarbon. So, we've got the primary data there to measure soil organic carbon changes. And then ADAS also visit every lens farm and they do habitat surveys. They help farms fill out carbon calculators. And then EcoAct basically check our maths. So they provide third-party assurance to check it's all good. That kind of range of reporting has enabled co-funding. So it's enabled us to stack interest from different funders. So to take a tangible example of this, down in the Tweed this year, we have Northumbrian Water and Diageo. They're going to be splitting the cost of cover crops 50-50. Northumbrian Water want to reduce nitrates. Cover crops, help with that. And Diageo want to boost farm resilience, reduce carbon. So they can both fund the cover crops, achieve their goals for 50-50, for half the price. And what that enables is it obviously reduces the risk and it gets more money in the pot, which is, what we've been talking about, and has enabled us to scale. So you can see here, this is what we kind of expect over the coming years. South Esk isn't on here. And you can see how important that public from the councils and from South of Scotland Enterprise and Perth and Kinross Council and Scottish Borders Council has been in leveraging the private finance. So, it's kind of, in our first year, it was 20% maybe in the Leven, but it's not increased, and the private investment has significantly increased. In terms of what this actually means, for farmers, it's more funding and it's a wider variety of measures. For funders, there's reduced risk, more co-funding, more impact. And for landscapes, the benefits are obvious of biodiversity and etc. I think one of the important things and interesting things about Lens is we're in the process of becoming a not-for-profit. So that's, maximising funding to farmers and value for money. We don't have, private equity in New York ringing me up asking when we're going to make money in Scotland, which is great. And then we put kind of farmers at the centre of the programme. So it's quite flexible. We talked about contracts earlier, but most lens contracts are 1 year. So, farmers can dip their toe in, see if they like it. They're not tied in for a lifetime. We provide farm level reports across those different metrics for every farmer, so they can see, what practices are working on their farm. And we provide kind of training and community. So when practices are new, we have an agronomist who kind of runs them through it. And then we also have what we call farmer forums, basically getting their feedback on how it's going for them, whether the pricing makes sense, whether the measures, address the issues within their farms. Can we add to them next year? And we're trying to valorise that for farmers. So we've got this partnership with Oxbury Bank. Basically, any lens farmer can get preferential bank account loan rates because they've got a more resilient farm business due to their participation. But we're also very conscious of farm data safety. And so, we're accredited by farm data principles. So the farmer retains control over their data. We're not selling it to, any financial institutions, etc., which I think is a very important point. And then finally, we're place-based. So as I say, I think the Forth Rivers Trust, Amelia was going to be here today presenting. I think she would say that they see Lens as kind of a financing framework to get what they want done in their catchment. And as I say, they do a lot of the farmer engagement. We recruit farmers in priority sub-catchments. They do a lot of the measure design, advice with measures, and so hopefully helping to address, the issues with water quality that we see in the loch. We create farmer networks. We're linking in with Leven Catchment Collective. So I was sitting earlier with the Green Action Trust, and they were talking about, their work in urban spaces. We're looking at whether, through the Leven Catchment Collective, we've got a budget for tree planting this year. Can we do it via community groups? Can they, get the finance that they need to do that? And then also influencing policy. So that's just to say we're trying to, align with NatureScot's goals and feedback where relevant. And so here's how companies can engage in Lens. As I say, we kind of have co-funding and farms ready to go in Scotland, which is great. And these are the kind of what we're helping people meet, emissions reduction targets, biodiversity targets, nature networks targets in the context of local government. And also, we're very open to setting up new lenses in new regions as long as the demand's there. And there's my details if anybody would like to find out more. And thanks for the patience. Last talk of the day. So, cheers.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks a lot, Tom. I think this is really wonderful that you've been able to develop that model, and now it's being replicated in different locations, so really showing the benefits of that approach.